you. My name is Leah Webb, and I am the co-chair of the Black Millennial Convention. I am also a former city council member from Binghamton, New York. And on behalf of myself and our Black Millennial Convention Steering Committee, we want to welcome you to our Black Millennial Town Hall Equity for 2020. So a little bit about the Black Millennial Convention. We were started 2 years ago, and actually it was our founder and also co-chair, Dr. Wes Bellamy, Vice Mayor of Charlottesville, Virginia, who had the foresight to create an opportunity for Black millennials to come together to create pathways towards equity across every industry in all communities across this country. And so he wasn't able to be here with us this weekend. He has had a wonderful new addition to his family. So, yes. So he's definitely here in spirit. I miss him very much, you have no idea. So, but again, thank you so much for being here. And so today's conversation is going to be very interactive. We're going to be joined by some Black millennial leaders who are making pathways for change across this country. We're also going to be joined by some of the candidates who are running for the 2020 presidential election, some of the actual candidates and some of their campaign team members. And none of this would be possible without our sponsors. This is our second annual BMC at CBC, so I know everybody in here is on, so thank you. So how we ended up here at CBC, myself, Dr. Wes Bellamy, and our steering committee, we were talking about and reflecting on what are the ways in which Black millennials show up and what spaces are being created for us to carry the torch, the mantle for change. And quite often we hear things like, wait your turn, this is not the time, we need more time, things of that nature. And so, however, as Black millennial leaders, we feel like there's an urgency of now, and equity is the guiding principle. You know, no shade to equality, no shade to diversity and inclusion. We really feel that equity, but ultimately liberation, is the way that we need to move forward to make not only this country better, but this entire world. And so we are bringing people together, not just simply here in the US, but across the African diaspora. Right. And so this conversation, and thinking about the 2020 election cycle, I don't know if folks are familiar, but in the 2018 midterm elections, 2.5 million Black millennials turned out to vote. I'm gonna say that stat again, 2.5 million Black millennials turned out to vote just in the midterm elections. And so this just speaks to the power that we have if we own it. And so that's why we wanted to have this town hall, and it's really designed to be a listening session for the candidates who are seeking the presidency, to our members of the Congressional Black Caucus, those who are watching from home via our Facebook live stream, in our communities, because the time is now. And so I am going to acknowledge again our sponsors. So Congressman Donald McEachin, he is responsible for us actually being here in the convention center. He's supported us since the beginning. Facebook, the Union of Concerned Scientists, Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, Vote Run Lead, Influence, National Association of Real Estate Brokers, the Daniel Initiative, Purple Isle, ACDC Marketing and Promotions and Branding, Scheinhardt Family, Christopher Thomas Photography, and United and Unlimited. And we have many other partners as well. So I want to get into it. So we're going to start off with having very brief, and I do mean brief because I am going to time it, remarks from one of our sponsors who's here, and then also we're going to bring on a couple of the presidential campaign teams and candidates that are here with us this morning. Then we're going to start with our panel. So I would like to, so I would like to have Antoine Thompson, who's with the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, give a very brief thank you, and we're going to turn it over to the presidential candidates. Yes. Yes. And if you haven't checked in already at the front desk, please make sure you do that. We will make sure we get all your information. Thank you.
morning. Good morning. Good to see all the Black Millennials here in the building. I want to just first congratulate the Black Millennial Convention and Councilmember Leah Webb for your leadership and vision and service. The Realtors of the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, NAREB, is the nation's oldest Black real estate trade association, and we are proud to support this event. There are 1.7 million Black millennials right now that make over $100,000 a year. Many of them are driving fancy cars. If you are driving a Land Rover and still have a landlord, then you are in violation. We must get the house first, then the car. We have launched a PAC, NatPAC, NATPAC1947.com, because land has always been power in America. Don't forget to vote. God bless you and congratulations.
Okay, so I want to bring up in no particular order. I'm going to start with, we are joined by one of our candidates for the presidency, Tom Steyer. Work with me, y'all. Y'all correct me quick. Okay, read me, all right. So he is going to say very brief remarks about why he's here and supporting Black millennials.
So you might know me because I'm running for president, and you might know me because I started the Need to Impeach movement about 2 years ago. We have over 8 million signatures. But you should know me because I started something called Next Gen America, which is about registering, engaging, and turning out people under the age of 35. It's the largest youth voter mobilization in American history. That is the largest age cohort in the United States, the most progressive in the United States, and the most diverse in American history. And as part of that effort, we specifically did something called Black Lives Rising to focus on Black millennials. We were on 13 HBCUs. The person who we supported the most in 2018 when we did the largest youth voter mobilization in American history, to our dismay, did not win, which was Andrew Gillum. But in fact, when we look at the future of the United States and winning in 2020, not just beating Trump, but winning big across the board, we know that it has to do with people under the age of 35. We know that it has to do with people who are diverse under the age of 35. And when we register, we focus on the African American community and the Latino community. So if you don't know Next Gen America, that's something I started specifically to make sure that the vote, the voice, and the leadership of Black millennials is heard in the United States of America. And I didn't just start it yesterday so I could run for president. Thank you.
Brief and to the point. I like that. All right. Next up, I'm going to bring Alencia Johnson. She is with the Elizabeth Warren for President campaign team. She's going to say very brief remarks as well.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, good. Y'all are awake, because I know I probably saw half y'all out last night. So we're all here. I'm actually so honored to be here on behalf of Senator Warren's campaign for president as her director of public engagement, especially talking to millennials, Black millennials, because we do hold the power in this electorate. And that is why she has done a lot of things to talk to young Black folks, from talking about canceling over 80% of Black student loan debt and to investing $50 billion in HBCUs if she was to become our president. And so we ask that you, if you want to know more about what she's doing, if you want to know what some of these plans mean for you, you can go see your student loan debt calculator, as well as Social Security. We just rolled out a plan about Social Security. I'm sure you guys are like, we're not thinking about retirement, but we actually should be, because over 60% of millennials have nothing saved for retirement. And we're paying taxes to Social Security, but by the time we are at the age to receive it, we won't be able to receive anything. And for people of color, that is even more detrimental. So I would encourage you to text SAVE, S-A-V-E, to 24477 to hear more information and get involved with our campaign. Thank you so much.
All right, next we will be joined by Angela Angel, who is with the Mayor Pete Campaign for America. She can come up and say some brief remarks. Angela.
Good morning, good morning. Good morning. Everybody is up and alert. Some of y'all made the brunch, I see. My name is Angela Angel. I am the Black Engagement Director for Mayor Pete Buttigieg. You may see our stuff, it's Buttigieg, but people also refer to us as Mayor Pete. One of the things that is really exciting about this campaign, I'm originally from South Bend, Indiana. Mayor Pete is one of the only candidates who comes from government, but not high-level government. He's a man of the people. He's been mayor of South Bend, Indiana for the past 8 years, and he's done some really great work there. I can just see the way that he has transformed the city and the way that he has also transformed the hearts of people. My family is from there. My 85-year-old grandmother, when he first took office, like a lot of folks that are talking about him nationally, say, oh, I'm not sure. I don't know how I feel about this. I've never interacted or had a gay man as my representative or really known them. And one of the last times he came to our church was a small church in South Bend, Indiana. My grandmother called me and was telling me how our pastor was joking from the pulpit, well, we're glad that you're here, but where's your husband? And that's the type of person that he is. He transforms his thoughts and minds around who he is, and just you look at his policies. And that's what I want you all to do. I want you to also know something about our campaign. We're the most diverse campaign staff there is. There is a millennial and a person of color and a black person, because there's a difference, right? This is the Black Millennial Convention. And I want to tell you, there is a black person as a head in every department that we have. We are 60% women as our senior staff. And we want to hear from you. So you can go to PeteForAmerica.com, and you can engage and interact with us. This is a campaign that is not high level. It's not coming from DC and the Beltway. This is coming from everyday Americans that are building this out, and we need your help and we need your interaction. It is a millennial who is building a campaign for all of us, and I invite you all in. I am Angela Angel. I am the Director of Black Engagement, and I'm very specific about that. We have African Americans for Pete, but we also have Black Engagement. That is something very different and encompasses the entire diaspora. And when they asked me to come in, they said, well, we want you to be head of African American engagement. I said, I don't do African American, I'm black. I'm black all day long, all my life. And it's something, and the campaign began to change, and this is how black folks are having impact in this campaign. So we began to change how we talk about it. So now when they talk about it, they talk about black folks, which is important, because that's who we're discussing and who we're talking to. And that's the type of campaign we are. We're changing and evolving to meet your needs. So join us at Pete for America. Thank you.
All right, last and not least, we have a surrogate here from the Cory Booker for President campaign team, Stephen Green.
Good morning, good morning. On behalf of Senator Cory Booker, we want to greet you this morning here at the Black Millennial Convention. I am Reverend Stephen Green. I happen to pastor in the great state of New Jersey and have had a chance to build a relationship with our dear senator, who is one who comes from a black mama who's a Delta from Fisk University, father from North Carolina Central University, but who realizes as a former tenant lawyer in Newark, New Jersey, in a city where we lack clean water that comes from our lead-infested pipes, that we need a transformative leader who will be able to serve this country at this very present age. We're in, as Charles Dickens says, we got the best of times and the worst of times. And as we look forward to seeing how we transform this nation, we realize that the presidential election is important, but that's not everything. Because the presidential election won't take away the pain of the unclean water in Flint, Michigan, and in Newark, and in Denmark, South Carolina. Electing a new president won't end our student loan debt all for once at one time. We must have a true radical uprooting from the core to take out the sin of white supremacy in this nation. And that's why Cory Booker in the Senate launched the reparations bill and to form the commission for the reparations. That's why He has a baby bonds bill to say that everyone between when you're born in this nation would start with a bank account with $1,000, and as you grow up to become 18, some of us, 50% of us, will be able to use that for a down payment for a car, for a house. Actually, where's my real estate man? We'll be able to use it for a down payment for a house, or be able to pay off our college loan debt. We must realize that we must redeem the soul of the nation and start at its core. And I believe that Cory Booker will help advance us and move us forward in that era. God bless you.
Thank you to all of our presidential candidates and campaign team members. The reason why we did this is because this is designed to be a listening session, because we want them to hear directly from that 2.5 million voter base of Black millennials on how the various issues that are part of our Black Millennial Convention policy priority areas, how we are having direct experiences, the impact, and what can be done through our voice, not someone else telling us what our experiences are. So again, this is a listening session, so without further ado, we're going to get our panel started. I'm going to bring up, y'all are in for a treat. We have some incredible moderators today. So our two moderators for the conversation, I'm going to bring up Philip Agnew. He is the co-founder of the Dream Defenders. He's an organizer, artist, cultural critic, and he probably got like 20 other titles, but I ain't gonna pull them all out there. Please put your hands together for Philip Agnew. And so at your seats, you see some index cards. So I said we're just going to be very interactive. So as the panel is sharing their perspective, take note of any questions you want to ask, because we're going to interchange between panel questions and questions from you in the audience, all right? So I'm going to turn it over to Philip, and then our other moderator, known her for many years, good friend and sister in the movement, Crystal Hyde Taylor, who is the founder and CEO of Influence. All right.
As an old Enneal, I take issue with the many years. We ain't that old. Oh my God. How y'all doing today? Let's shift the energy. Are y'all feeling good? Are we energetic? Are we excited? Are y'all here with some expectation, ready to get your opinions heard? Have your issues discussed? I'm excited. This is like homecoming.
Yeah,
family reunion.
It's
everybody who I love on a Saturday morning.
In the best and the worst ways.
Way too late last night. Way too late.
Yeah.
It's different at my age. Thank y'all so much for your time, for your energy. We're excited to have you here, excited to hear our panelists. What we're gonna do is we'll do introductions real quick. I want y'all to wave.
We're gonna introduce them.
Yes, we're gonna do the introductions. I want y'all to wave when I say your name. So on this first session, we have Brianta Maxwell, a political strategist and BMC steering committee member. We're waving, excellent. We have Brandon Scott, Baltimore City Council president. Breon Wells, founder and president of the Daniel Initiative. Nancy Mateer. Sorry, I know, I did not do Miami right. I apologize. An environmental activist and climate justice organizer.
We also have Kyra Stevenson Valley, policy advisor and secession coordinator for NAN, National Action Network. Timmy Bennett, Esquire, director of policy and communication for Consumer Health Foundation and BMC steering committee member. Give it up for our panel.
Yes.
So as has been discussed, these are unprecedented times, and we understand that next year will be a defining moment in our generation. It will be an election that our children and our grandchildren will either thank us for or deeply regret, right? And so the people in this room, I say this only when it applies, but this is the most dangerous room in DC right now. We have, let me provide context for that. We have young people who have the lived experience, right? Who also have the experience in developing and experimenting and building the solutions to the problems that affect our country, right? And who have decided early in the morning on a Saturday to come together and to plot and to develop a plan. So when I say this is the most dangerous room in the country right now, I mean it. And I hope that you all will help us and continue to move forward in what John Lewis calls good trouble, right? As we develop the plan. So we're going to get straight to it, right? Okay. So this is for anybody. So anybody can jump in. In thinking about your role, what you do and put out into the world, what does equity and what does power look like for 2020 and beyond for Black millennials in our communities? Equity and power.
Well, good morning, Are we good now? Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
When I think about just 2020 and beyond, and I think about equity, first and foremost, I think about making sure that I embed equity in every fabric of my life. I have to live and breathe equity in every single thing that I do. As an elected official and as a government servant, I also, and a black one and a young black one in a city like Baltimore, I also have to remember that our governmental structures have been inequitable for not just my entire life, but since we set forth on this country forcibly. And that they've been that way and racist on purpose. And that the only way that they're going to be equitable, and that the only way that they're going to consider us as equal and consider us and make sure that we are getting the things that we need, is that if we change it, if we go in. You cannot erase racist policies and equitable policies if you don't pass policy that takes it away. Right. It's not good enough to just put a black person in the council president's office or in the presidency or the school board if the policies that that person are working under were written by people who didn't think that person was even equal to them. That's what it means. It means dismantling the system from the inside out. Yeah, we have to throw rocks, we got to throw Scud missiles and all that at the system, but we also have to rebuild the system so that it represents us as well.
And I wanted to add exactly to that. And first of all, congratulations, Brandon, on taking a next step as a millennial in politics, because representation does matter. So the Daniel Initiative, one of the things as a recovering Hill staffer, as I say, on one of the committees that I served on, out of a staff of 50, I was the only person of color. So that means I was the Latino American. That's a problem. That means I was the Asian American, right? And clearly I'm black, I'm African American. And so it really drove home the point to me that the policy table is where we get our receipts, right? It took us, in 1865, we were supposedly, black men were supposedly granted the right to vote. That didn't come till a whole century later, right, enshrined and codified in the Civil Rights Act and in the Voting Rights Act. And so we have to make sure that we're diversifying as well these power structures to include not just elected officials, but the staff, the policy advisors that are navigating these spaces. And so we built a space to make sure that we're representing traditionally underrepresented populations. My average client cannot afford me, but power dynamics say that those of us with access and our owned power have to make the first step, right? And so, this is the last thing I'll say then. As I look at how we strategize here, I think that any strategy needs to be rooted and grounded in collective liberation, not just as an ideology, but as a standard. The ideology says that we don't rest until all of us are free. But the standard then says, even from a policy or even from an activist standpoint, that any action that I do cannot cause harm in my neighbor's space. So that means if I'm doing criminal justice transformation, I don't believe in the word reform because it's working exactly as it was built. But if I'm doing work in criminal justice transformation, I have to make sure I'm not causing undue harm in immigration reform. I have to make sure I'm not causing undue harm in environmental justice. And so we can't use terms like systemic and institutionalized whatever and then provide piecemeal solutions. We have to make sure that what we're bringing to the table is comprehensive and that what we're bringing to the table is not doing undue harm. And I'll just close by saying thank you all for waking up this morning and coming out here, because it is inspiring to be surrounded by black brilliance, by black excellence that is owning their position in their table.
I just want to add, as a private funder in the region, and I work with, as director of policy, I work with policymakers to advance racial equity work and racial justice work. And what we have to do is get beyond fake equity, right? It's a talking point. People talk about it all the time. But when it gets down to shifting the resources, then there's no money, right? And so we have to get beyond the fake equity, and we have to have real conversations about history in this country. But then we also have to, whatever you're doing, there needs to have a racial equity analysis on whatever you're doing, whatever decision, policy you're about to make. You need to be asking yourself who's going to benefit and who's going to be burdened by this policy and decision. And if Black and brown people will be burdened, then you're going to go back to the drawing board and redo that.
Right.
So I want to pivot a little bit, right? Because to me, everything that's been said so far, equity is actionable, right? It's not just a platitude. It's not just something out in the sky. And so when we talk about collective equity, when we talk about framing an equity agenda, what does that look like, and how do we start?
So first of all, we have to look at a lot of the issues that impact communities of color. And one of those issues is environmental and climate issues. And when we talk about these issues, we see that we are the ones that are carrying majority of these burdens. We talk about climate gentrification and climate migration, and can y'all hear me? Yeah. And we talk about how these particular communities have been disenfranchised for years, and then when our properties become profitable now, like Little Haiti, which is 10 feet above sea level, Allapattah, Little Havana, and we're being pushed out of these areas and saying, hey, you need to find somewhere else to live, and then we are put in more vulnerable situations. So we don't want to add to our threat multipliers, which is not being able to pay for our rent, affordable housing, not having access to affordable transportation, and seeing how all of this intertwines or links together, and making sure that we have some type of strategy to allow us to really address all of these issues.
Hi. So the question is, how do we actionalize equity, right? And I think within the context of 2020, I serve as a policy advisor at National Action Network, which is a civil rights organization founded by Reverend Al Sharpton in the spirit and tradition of Dr. Martin Luther King. So we've had a lot of access to these presidential campaigns, and I think one of the biggest issues is making sure that everyone understands that Black issues aren't just criminal justice transformation, like my brother Breon said, or police accountability, but it touches on everything. It's healthcare, it's environmental, it's housing, it's immigration, it's everything, right? So making sure that young people are brought into these conversations early on, making sure that you're talking to them from the time you have the idea, all the way up to the time you make that proposal and roll it out on stage. Because if you're not talking to these communities, then you might have gaps. Like there might be gaps on your staff, but there also might just be gaps that you're not thinking about. So making sure that everyone's brought into those conversations and you're honestly listening to what young people are saying we need.
Also, can I add to that? Also paying them, right? We were asked to do all this work and create all these transformational strategies, but we're not being paid our value. Making sure that we have representation at the table at the very beginning, like my fellow panelists said, but also being able to stay from the beginning all the way to the end, not just taking our intellectual property and saying, okay, we no longer need your assistance, and then making money off of that. So making sure that we're always at the table, being paid our value, and being represented in all aspects of the work.
Sorry, and I just want to add as well, we live in a get in where you fit in movement. Well, and there goes some water. Hope that wasn't ominous. But you know, we live in a generation where everybody has their own superpower. You know, one thing that if we put it back in historical context, it was political violence that we were dealing with in this nation that helped purport segregation and slavery and racism. It was also economic violence, right? And then finally it was social violence, all working in convergence at the same time. And so we both can't just employ, you know, strategies from a few spaces. We need everybody from their inherent context. And so that means, the activists on the street, because we often within our community, even as millennials, sometimes suffer a divide in the community. If we can just talk, we suffer a divide because those that are on the street, which is the conscience of our nation and much needed, are sometimes looking at the policy people like they're the political elites that are holding things down. But then as well, the people in the policy rooms are looking like, if you're not in here navigating this space, you ain't nothing. And so part of this is we have political, economic, and social violence that started this. It's going to take a strategy that encompasses all of that, because today we're still suffering those same things. Political violence through the Voting Rights Act that we need remedied, right? Economic violence, that fraudulent tax bill that President Trump passed, in which minorities, young people, and people of color were the afterthought, which means anything coming forward, you're still going to be the afterthought. But then as well, those social constructs, Jews will not replace us. We have all of that going. We have enough capacity and power, just even in this room, that if we learn what's your superpower, let me connect it to mine, to really build a Justice League, this is how we begin to really shift and take over the narrative.
So real quick temperature pulse of the audience. To this point of context, how many of y'all consider yourselves to be community organizers? Show of hands. Okay. How many of y'all consider yourselves to be policy strategists, activists, advocates? How many of y'all are using communications to help inform and push the message for other people, be it yourself? And how many of y'all are like the funders? Y'all might not show up to the front lines to protest, but you're gonna send a check to an organization, no matter how big or how small.
Raise your hand high. Raise your hand high. Can we get a photo? Can we get an envelope? Can we get the envelopes? Where's the envelopes? Where's the envelopes?
So here's gonna be one of your homework assignments coming out of this session, because we say that equity is actionable. Find somebody who raised a hand in a category different than your own. Have a conversation. This is what organizing looks like across all sectors, because we have to have every single person participating, not just on the substantive issues, right? You need your telecom policy wonks, just like you need your criminal justice, your education, your voting rights, all of that. We have to be more strategic in the way we leverage our intellectual capital and our personal resources.
And truly, while we're on the subject of strategy, what is inherent in a strategy is an analysis of time, place, and condition. All right? Time, place, and condition. What works in Rochester, New York may not and probably will not work in Miami, Florida. And so far too often we see in our movement us copying what we're seeing other people doing and wondering why it is not being applied or responded to with the same force, right? So time, place, and condition. Now, you started to bring it up, and I'm interested, we're interested, what are some of the obstacles, right, that you've had to contend with, and how did you overcome them? And if we can have, not long platitudes, but what was the obstacle, what did you do to do something about it?
Well, first and foremost, the biggest obstacle to me when I was first elected in 2011 is that I was the only person under the age of 30 on the council. We had 15 council members. There were 2 of us under 40, and everyone else was 55 and above. So what did I do? I went back and brought 7 of my friends onto the council, and now we have a council that is actually 9 of the 15 members are millennials, and that's what we have to do. And the obstacles are also, again, trying to bridge that generation with my older colleagues at the time who didn't understand that just because they were in charge didn't mean that our city was no longer inequitable. So what else did I do? Did exactly what my sister said. Put it in a policy. Put a policy through the Baltimore City Council that every city agency now is going to have to operate through a lens of equity, starting with this upcoming fiscal year. Just this past week, putting a policy that says every city council bill that comes before the city council has to have a racial equity analysis, so that when I'm long gone and in the ground, and or actually for me, sitting on my grandchildren's in an urn on their mantle, that will still be there. That policy, I told them, don't waste no money on me when I'm gone. that policy will still be there, because in my city, Baltimore is the birthplace of housing redlining through legislation. That's where it got. That's how I got to the rest of you. Someone that sat in the chair that I sit in every Monday night did that. So that's how we have to do it. We have to dismantle it and leave it for the next generation. It's not just good enough for you to do it when you're there, because you're not always going to be there. You're not always going to be the person in that seat. You have to make change that's going to last longer than you, and policy is one of those ways that you can do that. And they might come back and change the policy, but it's a lot hella harder to unchange policy than it is to replace you.
I think I want to answer that question too. So with me, it was hard being a black female leader in white male dominated spaces and dealing with black men who don't realize they're black. And what I mean by that is...
Excuse me, can you?
Oh, yeah.
Can you, because I think there are not enough people that got that the first time. Say that again.
Being a black female leader in white dominated spaces, white male dominated spaces, and dealing with black men who don't realize they're black. And with that being said, I've always had to deal with white men and black men who will undermine my leadership and always go behind me to get things done. And so in order to change that, I stayed myself. So I was like, I'm not going to conform to who you want me to be. I'm going to be myself. And then on the flip side, I'm going to create an army of other black girls and women behind me just to ruffle your feathers some more. So I created a nonprofit back home with one of my good friends, Bratika Moody, called Taking Root. So what we do is we train young black girls between the ages of 10 and 18 to become political leaders. So once they turn 18, they are required to register to vote and hold voter registration drives. And so we train them how to be political operatives, work in communications, run for office, et cetera, et cetera. So that's been my biggest issue, not as an elected official, but just being a black female leader in these male-dominated spaces.
Yeah, I was just gonna add another.
Yeah, we got time.
Oh, we got time.
So as Brandon was talking about, it's like building that infrastructure, because even people in this space, we get burnt out as traumatizing work, right? And then when we leave, that great work that we were doing leaves with us. So you have to build the infrastructure, you have to fund it appropriately, and you have to pipeline, you have to bring in your successors. But then you also have to, I feel like a lot of folks don't know history, and you have to ground your work in history. Like white supremacy is pervasive, it changes, right? Like Stamp from the Beginning, I'm telling y'all gotta read it. Please, everybody read Stamp from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi. There's a whole lot of other books I could tell you about, but at least start with that. And what I mean by that is if it's the comprehensive history of racist ideas and racist policies in this country, right? So when we were enslaved, it was like black people so strong, they need to be in the fields. This work is built for them because they're so strong, right? Then you had abolishment, right? And it was like black people too weak to understand freedom. Like they're psychologically weak, right? So it's so pervasive, it's ever changing, and we can perpetuate those inequities as black folks. Like people say, DC, well, y'all have 4 decades of black leadership. So why are the inequities still so pervasive, right? But the city is one of the most residentially segregated cities in this country, and those inequities perpetuate that. They've been, Ward 7 and 8 have been historically disinvested in, right? And the reason why black folks are over Ward 7 and 8 is because the precursor to the DC Council did the black codes and put the black people east of the river, right? And so like if we have council members that are still perpetuating these inequities because they don't know history.
Right.
Yep.
And to add to that, so I work around environmental and climate issues, and that is not the most sexiest topic to help translate to our communities. So what I've been proud of doing is really translating that information to our folks. And how does climate change directly impact us? I know from us as a people, we're very reactionary. So unless you can see it happening in front of you, people can't relate to it. So when you see climate gentrification, as I mentioned, happening in their backyards, they're seeing the price increase in their utility bills. Those are tangible, climate change is directly impacting me. Environmental issues, you don't have clean water, you don't have clean air, that's directly impacting us. So how do we make this conversation sexy? Well, clean water is something that is not supposed to be a privilege. It's our human right. So connecting those dots, saying, listen, you have the right to speak up in front of your commission hearings and saying, hey, here are the tools for you to really advocate for yourselves. So the work that we do at New Florida Majority is really giving those individuals the tools to really empower them to go in front of their commission meetings and say, we want this policy change. We want the tools to test our waters, to hold you accountable because you work for us.
And to this point of advocating for yourselves, we want to create space for those of you who have questions to ask them. So quick show of hands, does anybody have a question that they want to ask? 1, 2, we'll take these first. 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll come, you have, okay. Yeah, so we'll do 2 rounds. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah. One real quick. Do we have a... Because we know they're up here dropping these gems, and we can feel that y'all want to speak up.
Thank you so much.
And question.
Yep.
So
Yes.
my question.
In a question mark.
In a question mark.
You see, amen. You see my excitement. You see my excitement. I am a problem solver. I am a certified math teacher. My name is Devetta Lynn Range. I am the IP owner, the copyright author. I said the IP owner, the copyright author of Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, and Blue Lives Matter. And I applaud the millennials because I taught middle schoolers and high schoolers and young adults as a missionary to do exactly what you're doing.
If we
I
can,
say go
just
forward. And your
let's-
question,
Yes.
your question is, how do you incorporate the fact that we have to pray as well as we have to act and we have to say that Black lives are a part of the all in All Lives Matter because both are my work? And how do you incorporate these things so that the people understand that racism is a choice? And
Okay.
because racism is a choice,
Right.
People can choose to be racist or choose not to be. How do you incorporate that into your
I think a lot of people have
organization?
questions for you too. I'm gonna
Excellent.
get.
And I am available. I am available. I am available for you.
So yeah,
To God be the glory.
that is. You said, yeah. Yeah. Let's. Yeah.
y'all
We're
just
gonna
stack-
collect them and then have them go.
We're going to take a
Yeah,
couple
yeah.
more questions.
Hello, good morning. My name is Tiara Goodwin, recent graduate of Coppin State University.
Let's go.
My question for the panel is, in what ways can you guys incorporate the idea of going to see the manager or can I see the manager? And by that I mean, when we're all in establishments where we're supposed to receive a certain service and we're customers paying our money, we can like that to taxpayer dollars. Like, we pay taxes. Okay, you're not doing your job. Let me speak to the manager. Let me speak to this person because what you're doing isn't benefiting me. So how can we incorporate that, I guess, within the whole scope?
So yeah, we're gonna get, and y'all can incorporate, respond to those first two.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, first and foremost, I'm never going to apologize for being black. And if people don't understand that, they don't recognize that I'm an unabashed black man, then they just going to have to live with their own guilt and their own racism. For the second question, I am the manager.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
But when the manager used to be the person making the fries, they think differently. They act differently. They work differently. So what the manager did for me, for example, I just finished a round of town halls where I chose to go out into my community and spend 9 nights talking to my constituents. And for me, it actually drives my staff nuts. This is why I like to go out and walk around town. And they say, well, can we go home yet? I'm like, no. Because you have to be, when we get into positions, we have to be better than the people that came before us.
Right.
We can't forget where we came from. I'm always going to be that little poor boy from Park Heights in Baltimore City. So even when I am the manager, people can touch me, they can talk to me, they can always see the manager because the manager used to make fries just like them.
And I think to echo and add to what Brandon said, as we're in these spaces of owning our power, we don't need to wait till we make it to start building succession plans. Because here's the issue, you know, and I'm not throwing shade on the previous generations, because we would not be able to have the privilege to be able to speak on platforms like this had it not been for others who paved the way. However, we have to start thinking, we have to start thinking early on, right? And so one of the things that we did at the Daniel Initiative when I first started, and I have no staff, and I didn't have any money really to be able to help people like that, we just had intentionality to provide a fellowship and an internship for people. I didn't know how we were going to pay for it. I didn't know what we were going to do, but by hook or by crook, we were going to do this. So we were making space. We think that you need more money. You need more connections. All you need is intentionality. And one thing I've realized about even these next generation, while they do want coin, hashtag coin, like let's not, be oblivious about that, they want access more than anything. And so, in one sense, we have to, as the leaders now, kill this selfishness.
Yes, yes.
Like I'm not worried about my contacts walking out the door. We good on this, so I don't mind introducing other people to my sphere, because we have to make sure this legacy lives on and that we're building it on early.
That's also how you manage the burnout
Right.
that Timmy was talking about, right?
Yeah.
It's more work and more problem than any of us alone can manage. So if you work together, create new opportunities, like not only across your sectors, but with younger generation. We at that point, younger generations.
And Crystal.
Crystal, I just want to add to that
Yeah,
point
it's
of legacy.
Old Ennial, I'm trying to told you. The younger generations, but that's part of the way that you manage this burnout, because it is traumatizing work. It is hard. And if we continue to try and reinvent the wheel, we just gonna keep going around that hamster wheel without making adequate progress.
Thank you. So just to the can I see the manager question, that's like what we do at NAN. We are the boots on the ground. And I always like to talk about our civil rights toolkit. So not reinventing the wheel, looking at history, looking at the legacy, thinking about the things that have worked in the past. So going from demonstrations, so now we have digital, online, Twitter, Instagram that we can use to spread information, but we also can't use that as a distraction from being on the ground in these members' faces.
Yes.
Right, like marching through the streets, yelling, no justice, no peace. From there, we have to go through to concrete policy changes.
Yes.
And another tool in the toolbox, which works really well, is litigation. And a good example of that recently happened is the Eric Garner case. We saw 5 years, nothing happened. Because the DOJ was handling it, and then NYC fired the officer who murdered Eric Garner, which was a win, but it was not something to be celebrated because he shouldn't have been killed in the first place. But now, we recently, like 2 weeks ago, went to Congress. We were with Gwen Carr, who's Eric Garner's mother, and we met with presidential candidates, and we met with senators, and we told them that we want to have a hearing on police misconduct. And when you're in their faces, they listen. So now that hearing is set for next week. It's September 19th at 10 a.m. It's open to the public. So I hope y'all come. And my boss will be testifying, so.
And to piggyback on what Breon said, I think it's a matter of, if you have that seat at the table, make sure you're bringing other people with you, because you should not be the person that's everywhere all the time.
Yes.
So you should be able to spread that access out. Right? And then I also want to acknowledge that Tom Steyer is up here taking notes, y'all. He's in a room full of Black millennials taking notes. So y'all need to remember that.
Okay.
Real quick though, as we pivot on, I think this question was how do you own?
Yeah, how do you become more empowered in your
So my question was more so around, how do you guys empower the citizens to realize their power as taxpayers? So when things are wrong, they feel more compelled to go to these town hall meetings, these spaces, and speak up on their behalf because they're paying the people in office to do their job.
Can I answer that? Yeah, so first off, really pushing to have these town halls at a time where people can actually attend them. So when you deliberately have a commission meeting at 9 in the morning, that X's out a huge demographic. Ensuring that there's childcare at these town halls, so people don't have to say, oh, I can't come because I have children and I can't find a babysitter. Also providing food. I know that's something that's very minimal, but people like to fellowship and talk around food and really share ideas around food. So really making these town halls accessible to everyone.
And to be clear, please, to be clear, Nancy will be an elected official shortly, soon, very soon. Nancy has already run, right? And so this answer here is about a democratic practice, right? And it is what this lawmaker is doing by making sure that he's going beyond the walls of his office and talking nightly to his constituents. And it's also in the infrastructure because, racism, white supremacy, capital is not a choice. It is an infrastructure, right, that is built in, and it is the way that the government interacts with its citizenry, right? And so that is, I think, when we're thinking about really radical things that we can do and that we can push for, something as simple as saying we have all of our city council meetings, our county commission meetings at times where people can come, right, with bus passes, childcare, et cetera. This is a radical idea coming from somebody who you're going to be hearing a lot more from.
Thank you. And then leverage technology too, like in Charlotte, North Carolina, we actually have city council meetings online. They do them now. You can have that two-way conversation. So it's like leveraging the tools that are already accessible to you to make it accessible.
So as we close this panel, because there's another panel coming up right after this with even more genius, we would like for each of you all to answer this question here. What are the action steps, right? We already heard a few, but if folks want to leave here with the takeaway, they can go Monday and start on something. What are the takeaway? What are the action steps as we go forward, right, with 2020 on the horizon, to impact our community, the collective community? So we can start either way or from the middle.
Just making sure the future mayor from Florida isn't going to go first. First and most importantly, I think that we have to be willing to risk it all. No matter what your lane is, and like my brother said, there's plenty of lanes, plenty of seats on that bus to that destination of a greater black diaspora. Risk it all, no matter what the consequences are for yourself. For me, that means going through my job, getting elected, and then doing my job because of what the right things are. Even if that means the people that voted me in, the ones that I love, the ones that I will die for, unelect me because I did the right thing.
Yes.
That's what we have to do. If that's in business, if that's in the church, if that's in the courtroom, if that's on the street corner, we have to risk it all for our people, no matter the consequences for ourselves.
So I would say the biggest action step is making sure you leave this room and go out into your communities and share this information. We're all here because we're active, we're engaged, we're passionate, we're concerned about what's going to happen in 2020. But being in this room is a privilege. Not everyone can be here, not everyone can get to DC to be a part of CBC Week. So making sure that when you're going home, you're telling everybody, you're sharing the information, you're bringing them in, you're getting them engaged in the same way that you're engaged, because we can't do this alone.
So I would add to that, and I don't want to take for granted that everybody has owned their power in this room. So I think the first step is realizing that you have power, right? I work in a co-sharing space, right? And they've built it for millennials because they understand we are the largest voting bloc. We make up the largest economic power. So if you haven't already owned your power, we really need you to own your power from your space. But then again, as I said at the beginning, we need to make collective liberation not just an ideology, but a standard in everything that we do. And while it does bring an extra burden, because now sitting even from policy spaces, there are certain things that we have blind spots from. That commitment is how we transform things at the end of the day. And so, I'll say this last thing. That means then for me as a policy person, I do believe that a lot of these activists and these people on the ground need to find somebody who is familiar with the power in the policy space. And as you're building your strategies, bring them in early on. People who know how to navigate that hall. People who know how to say, go from and put this money from this line item into this program, because you're already dealing with strapped resources. You're already dealing with a little bit, but collectively we have the power to take this over.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said thus far. I would just reiterate, no history. I will also say be intentional and targeted in your work. Like, we really need to be focusing on these gaps right now, like these wage gaps, these wealth gaps, particularly the wealth gap, this health gap, right? Whatever you're doing, how is it impacting a gap? And then I would say, be graceful with each other. Like, it's enough space for all of us. And we need to, I'm fine with call out culture for some people, particularly white people, but for Black folks, we need to be calling each other in as much as possible.
That's good. That's good.
I would echo everything that my fellow panelists have said, but one thing for sure is being unapologetic, being comfortable with self. We are so hard on ourselves, and really just ensuring that we're doing what we need to implement self-care, because this work is trying. It is a struggle. They don't call it the struggle for no reason. So taking care of ourselves, also pushing your communities to go 100% renewable. That is a hard ask. We all know that we are all impacted by climate change, but our communities of color are impacted the most. So really pushing for policies that equate to just transition into a 100% renewable economy.
So this is obviously just one part of the conversation, but we're not going to solve all of our issues in a 2-hour total session. So make sure, if you're not already doing so, follow BMC Movement, and then we'll have everybody's contact information posted on there. If you have questions about some of the questions that was asked, we will have contact information available online as well. But please join me in thanking this panel, and we're going to transition into our next setup.
Okay, real quick, as we transition, you all, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I am an organizer, I'm an artist, I am a person who grew up on the south side of Chicago, the oldest of 4 boys, and I'm proud to serve as a national surrogate for the Sanders campaign. And we are excited to be here. If you all will turn around, some members from our team, whenever we move as a collective, right? And so we have members of our team who are represented here. I would be excited to spend some time, we would be excited to spend some time talking about the senator. I want to tell y'all something. If we do what we always did, we're going to keep getting what we always got. Did y'all hear me? And so I've never been one to be afraid of doing something new. And we have an opportunity next year to do something and for people to join a grassroots movement like one nobody has ever seen. And so I'm happy to be here as a surrogate, and we're going to have our next folks for the next panel come on up. Come on up.
Yes, if the next panel can come up. And then the first panel, can you just step to the side over here, please, so we can keep it moving? The first panel, can you step to the side here so we can take your picture and switch in a timely manner? My good brother, Dr. Wes Bellamy, who's watching this right now. So if you're not following us on social media, please do so. Here's the information. As this transition is happening, so we are joined, as I said at the beginning, this is a listening opportunity for various leaders, whether it's the presidential campaign teams, the candidates, but also Congressional Black Caucus members. And so we've been joined by a representative from the Senator Bernie Sanders campaign who's going to say some brief remarks as we transition to the next panel.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to do this. My name is Brianna Joy Gray, and I'm the National Press Secretary for the Bernie Sanders campaign. I think a lot of people should recognize, as well as me, that we have a lot of members of our campaign back here, including our Deputy Campaign Manager, Renee Spellman, this black woman back here, Black Millennial back here, that's right, and Erica England, who is also a current Howard student, and also a full-time member of our ops department. Now, Erica, Phil Agnew, and I spent the day on Howard University's campus earlier this week. And we spent the day there just with us, some of our black camera crew from the campaign, and a sign that simply said, "Ask me about Bernie." And we have the confidence as a campaign to do that sort of thing because we have that kind of a belief in the messaging power of what this movement stands for. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but Bernie Sanders' campaign slogan is "Not Me, Us." And a lot of the comments from the panel of this last session really resonated with me because the issues they were speaking to are the issues of collective action. And when Philip says, it's not, if we keep doing the same thing, we're going to get the same result, that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and thinking we're going to get the same result, well, that's part of why I left my job and decided to commit myself to this campaign when I previously had not worked in politics. Before this, I was a corporate lawyer for about 7 years, a deeply unhappy corporate lawyer. But like a lot of you, I felt like I couldn't leave because of the golden handcuffs that are student debt. Now, I know a lot of you can empathize with that because black women hold more student debt than any other group in this country. And part of what resonates with me about this campaign is that we're not a campaign that says, let's throw a little bit of money at this problem. Let's give some lip service to this issue. It says, let's find an ultimate solution for this. Let's cancel all student debt, whether it's trade school debt, whether it's debt that your parents took out on your behalf. And moreover, I don't know if you missed this, but last night in the presidential debate, Bernie Sanders also mentioned that he's going to make HBCUs tuition free, right? So these are the kind of systemic solutions to the problems that we've been facing that are coming out of this campaign. And it's, when we're talking about things like the maternal mortality gap, sorry, okay. I'm being told I'm going to wrap up. But the main point is that ultimately, if we approach the problems in a way that leaves some people out, if we say we're going to have a health insurance plan that doesn't cover everybody, we all know historically who it is that gets left behind. It's people who look like the people in this room, right? 20% of black people over the age of 20 have diabetes, either diagnosed or undiagnosed. And the cost of insulin in this country is 10 times more than it is in the country to our north. We are the ones disproportionately suffering from these problems, and I encourage you to all to participate in this campaign and find out more about the solutions that we've offered. Go to Bernie Sanders' website, all the policies are there, but moreover, we have a really strong social media presence, and we have a lot of explainer videos and opportunities to reach out and talk to the community, including the video we just shot at Howard with Phil the other day. So thank you for your time. Thank you so much. Y'all get informational transitions. How's that? That's seamless. We love it. Commercial. She's crazy. Well, thank y'all for staying. Thank you. Please help us in welcoming panel 2, who's going to bring the energy to flavor. This is part 2 of what promises to be a lively conversation on everything. Okay.
Okay. So we've got Francesca Menes, Florida State Director for Local Progress. Give it up for Francesca. We've got Lionel Moise. Did I mispronounce it, brother? Moise. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, it is. Lionel Moise, Emmy Award-winning anchor and correspondent and host of Business Insider.
Jewel Jones, the state representative from Michigan and a BMC steering committee member. And if you haven't seen his clothing line, holla, we're going to get that plug. All right, Wakenya Clanton, the senior advisor to DNC chair and a BMC steering committee member. And welcome away. My favorite and yours, y'all are all my favorites, but David Johns, executive director of the National Black Justice Coalition.
Yep. And Ashley White, the Committee on Education and Labor. Okay, so we're going to get straight to it. We've got questions from the audience that we didn't get to in the other panel, and one of the ones that rose to the top here. So anybody can jump in on this. What are your thoughts on incremental change? There's a constant debate over, reform or what is radical, what is on the revolutionary edge of reform. What are your thoughts on incremental change?
Well, good morning, good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, right. We good. I'm happy to be here first and foremost, but I think in incremental change, I mean, of course, depending on, it's all situationally dependent. So sometimes, baby steps work, and sometimes you have opportunity to do something that's monumental. And so I don't think that there's anything wrong with it. We just have to realize what situation we're dealing with and just make it happen.
I'm going to jump in. I think incremental change is bullshit. Excuse my language. Like, I think we really need, if change needs to happen, we need to demand that it happens and make that change. Like, why, if you know that there's inequities in our communities or our society, why should we wait 20 years to fix an issue that is the exact issue that we're in right now? Yeah. And I feel like when we realize that a change needs to happen, we need to mobilize and gather and demand that that change happens instead of getting a little, they give us a little bit and shut you up for a little bit and you think it's good, and then 10 years we're talking about the same thing. And so I feel like if change needs to happen, we need to go all the way for it instead of waiting for things.
Sure, thanks. Hi, everyone. I think to add to that, when you talk about incremental change and we talk about change in general, you have to think about impact and intended impact and also intended consequences of that change. So I think, yes, some change dictates and demands action right away, but most change requires strategy. Right? And so you have to be thoughtful about how, when you talk about we need to change this, what is the this? Like what's at stake, through the process, who's hurt along the way, because some change upends everything. So you have to think about the welfare of people at every stage of the process. And I think it's important to figure out, when we talk about the type of change that we need to do a true assessment of its unintended and intended impact and consequences, but also be a part of the process, the procedural change, the systemic change, and that does require time. So yes, I agree with you in some respects that some change has to be radical, but also I believe that change has to also be thoughtful and strategic.
I also agree with Lionel, but I have a little bit of a different perspective. I had the opportunity to teach for over a decade before I embarked upon my current journey. And I just want to say that sometimes the small things that you do make a big difference to people, and you have no idea. And so Lionel's definitely right. We've got to be radical. We've got to move forward. We've got to push forward. But when I think about what I used to do in my classroom for my 5th and 6th graders, I know that I had made small changes that nobody cared about but them. And they thank me for that to this day. And so I think we have to find a middle ground. Remember that sometimes if we are not in a space to do the big things, that it's okay to do the small things and to do them for the people that are around you and need you in the spaces where you are.
So I'll just kind of quickly chime in. Bonjour. Buenos dias. And good morning. My name is Francesca Menes, and I would say it is not bullshit to say that incremental change is bullshit. It's not. As someone who does policy work and has been doing policy work for over 12 years, I can tell you that there are big wins and there are small wins. And when you tell our community that there are only big wins at the table and they don't happen, they get disenchanted by the process. And so you have to be careful about the terms that you use and the words that you use, because our people are going to get disconnected from this process. If you're not on the ground, if you're not deeply rooted in our community where you're seeing that feeding that person for that day matters to them. Addressing systematic, institutional, structural change takes time. And it's both. It's not either or. And the fact that we are in a movement space where we're always trying to create a dichotomy, that it's one or the other, and that there are not many paths to get to the same place, is part of the problem and why our people are disconnecting from this work.
Yes. So I'm going to bring David into this, and I want to put a little spin on that similar question because we just got another one from the audience. How are you intentional about making sure your work includes LGBTQIA folks?
Specifically Black trans women.
Yes.
So for those who don't know, my name is David Johns. I'm a free Negro who used to work for still my president, Barack Hussein Obama, Michelle Yvonne Robinson Obama, Sasha Malia Sonny Bo, Grandma Robinson too, leading an initiative focused on educational excellence for African Americans. I say that because for more than a decade, I showed up in this space, and the thing that people cared most about was that I'm a Black man who cares deeply and passionately about all Black people. Shit shifted. I no longer could stay in that role, and I now lead the National Black Justice Coalition. We are, to be clear, intentional and unapologetic in acknowledging that as long as there have been Black people, there have been Black lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, same-gender loving, which is a term that I use because gay is a white political identifier of Black people. And the reality is, I don't give a fuck about your feelings about it. So, yes, I'm mad, in part because so much of my work is showing up in Black spaces, trying to talk to Black people about the need for us to make space for all of us. So there are 3 things that have been on my heart since I sat on the Breakfast Club earlier this week with Malik Yoba, who talked about being trans attracted, which is a thing, right? And it cannot be the reality that Malik Yoba is the only Black man who's taken a public space ever who's trans attracted, but he's the first person that said it, right? And words matter, they're important. And there are 3 things that keep coming up for me. 1, I'm so tired of Black people that purport to care about Black people that don't care about all of us. Period. I said it. I was blessed by my friends and colleagues to get an award the other night, and I literally just said it. If you don't care about all of us, just tell me so I don't have to fuck with you. Because too many of us masquerade as if we care about all of us, and the reality is we only care about some of us. And then the real reality is some people only care about themselves, which is fine too, but just get the fuck out of the way. The second thing is this: words matter. Words matter. I will not change my words. That's fine. That's fine. This isn't for you. But what you're not going to do is tell me how to show up. What you are not going to do is tell me how to show up. You cannot like it.
Yeah.
But you're not going to tell me how to show up.
So listen, we're going to have...
You can talk after I finish. What you're not going to do is tell me how to show up. It happens too often.
Okay, listen. Please. We're going to have a Q&A, and that's going to be how the audience dialogues with the people on here. If you have an issue with how it's being, you don't have to be here, or you could talk about it after.
Yeah, words matter, period. We spend too much time not wanting to have difficult and uncomfortable conversations. I said a factual statement on the radio, which is that gender is assigned at birth. And you would have thought that I said everybody and their mother was anything but a child of God. And the thing that it brought up for me is that the way white supremacy wins is that we think that we have to be a monolith. We think that we have to approve and co-sign other people's existences even when we don't understand it. And we also buy into this belief that there's a scarcity of space. People taking up space using terms to define themselves, challenging people to think about our own privileges should have nothing to do with you and how you feel you show up in the world. But at the point at which you and your insecurities and inability to acquire new language or accept that we evolve and things change and people take up space in ways that they haven't before, should not preclude other people from getting free. The biggest challenge for me is that, like, this is not just about somebody's lifestyle. Black LGBTQ SGL people live with other Black people. We live in the South disproportionately. We live in states where it is legal to discriminate against us based on actual or perceived sexual identity, gender orientation, and expression. What I'm saying is that many of us don't have the rights that some of y'all take for granted. And unless and until we have more of these conversations and people appreciate that somebody, again, claiming space in ways that they haven't been able to before is not an attack on you. Black, cis, hetero women, trans women are not your enemies, they're your sisters too. The way that they come into womanhood should not be an attack on how you came into it. And I'm not saying this stuff is easy. It's why I'm taking this opportunity to sit in this. But what I'm saying is that it is necessary. None of us are free unless and until all of us are free. And again, if you can't hold space for us in this moment, then just move. Because we have been and will continue to do this work that y'all benefit from, to be clear. We just got to do better.
Can we all just take a second, right, to reflect, and we talked about this earlier, this is democracy at work. This is a body politic. This is black people who are strong enough, astute enough, intelligent enough to handle a variety of views, a variety of expressions, right, a variety of ideas. This is what democracy looks like. It is messy, it is tense, but we still in this, right? Okay? So that's why that's why the Millennial Convention put this together. And I'm gonna tell you, there's a lot of other rooms where they can't even handle any of that, right? So that's what we do. We are democracy at work. So you wanna go to the next one?
Sure. So to this point of democracy in work, right, at work, and bringing into the conversation the need to be intersectional in how we operate and really collective, really operating as a collective. And I just want to kind of go down the line, and we'll start with you, Wakenya. We know a lot is hanging in the balances as an understatement for 2020. Beyond specific candidates, what's some of the strategy that we need to operationalize, not only in terms of the presidential and congressional elections, but let's be real about what happens on a local and state level, because on a day-to-day, the things that impact us the most are what's happening right in our immediate communities. And if we're not showing up to city council, county commission, you don't know who your mayor is, you don't know who your water and sewer commissioner is, you don't know who's responsible for your livelihood, what you fighting for? You know what I'm saying? Because these are long policy battles that happen up here. These are these 10-year fights that happen up here. But when we go home, that's where it happens. So what is our strategy going into this next year?
Our strategy as a collective in terms of black people should be around engaging our people. It's not enough for us to depend on these candidates to show up for us. We have to show up for us. There are some real kitchen table issues that are happening across this country every single day, and it's happening right next door to you, within feet of your home. And some of us are so disconnected from each other because we've made it or we're able to drive to work. We underestimate the fact that our brothers and sisters still have to walk to buses and wait for hours to and from locations. And we're not talking about that in a real way. We're not talking about how do we create more transportation and more infrastructure within our own communities, how we hold these local elected officials accountable for making sure that you have actual sidewalks that your kids can walk down the streets on, or real guttered systems and actual ditches and not just scrapes on top of grass. Like this stuff is called infrastructure. Our communities are too often regulated to places on plots of land that have not been cultivated for our survival. That is real. That is a real issue. And so one of the things I want to challenge the folks in this room and in other spaces that may be tuned into us is to really rethink the way that we engage with our communities. That we are beyond the point of having people who live next door to us who are strangers to us. Yes. Like we are beyond that point. It's not enough when we see something, when it makes the news, for it to become important to us. Yes. Things are happening around us each and every day that may not be happening to us directly, but they actually are directly impacting us because of what our zip codes are. Yep. And if you are too far removed from your neighbor to understand it, then you need to check yourself. Like, I know we're in a season where we're trying to check everybody else, and we should be holding these folks accountable. Let me be clear. But we have to re-engage and be connected to our people in a way that we haven't done in a very, very long time. Yep. I think, and that's really what it is about, being connected to each other, but also making sure that we're connecting folks to the right influencers and the right decision makers when it comes down to this. It's not enough for them to fill a pothole in your community, y'all, when you really need a whole new street.
Right.
I think we have to pay attention. And I live in the educational space. And what I want to say is that education is one of the pillars upon which our country is founded, right? But it's a very ugly one. And it's one that we've managed to navigate despite its slippery slopes. And what I want to say is that education and educational institutions, whether it be community colleges or trade schools or P through 12 institutions in your neighborhood, they matter. They matter economically, they impact gentrification, they impact so many other avenues of your life. And when we think about those spaces, I would say to get involved, know what's happening with your school board, know what's happening with district changes, what kids are going to what schools, know what's happening to your students when gentrification is occurring and where they're being sent. And it connects a lot to what you're saying, because the dismantling of educational institutions in our communities is a way that they dismantle us as communities of people. And so we're all raising children, and you don't have to necessarily have one in your home or have birthed one or be a father or mother to one to be responsible for the children that are in your neighborhood and in your community. Education is one of the ways that we move forward, but it's also one of the ways that they get us, and so we need to pay attention to that.
I think we're all kind of echoing the same thing, but I think knowledge is power, and we hear this all the time. And as a member of the media, it's so easy for everyone to say, oh, the media only cares about this thing, but like, we need to take it upon ourselves to be active in our communities and well-versed on the issues that we are saying that we care about. So we have all of these candidates running for office who can make decisions on our livelihood, literally a matter of life and death in some areas, and we're only focused on the 4 or 5 issues that we're seeing on CNN. What are we doing beyond that to make sure that we're informed? Are we showing up to these town halls where they are speaking on the issues and directly answering our questions? Are we scrolling more to dig deeper past what we're seeing on social media? And I feel like oftentimes we're playing catch up when it's too late, and we should be informed and engaged from the very beginning and demanding that they are answering the questions and solving the issues that we know are important to our day-to-day lives, not just giving a sexy plan on immigration reform. Like, it's way more than that, and this really can be the matter for life and death for many people.
3 quick things. 1, too many of us are dying because we don't have gun control laws that we need to have, so everybody should register with the NRA. 2,
It's $30.
I'm not-
It's $30. It's $30.
I'm serious.
It's $30.
Oh, people are laughing. Okay. The second thing, the average life expectancy of Black trans people is between 30 and 35. You can ensure that in your community there are laws to require first responders, police officers, paramedics, individuals who are often called to the scene when there are crimes committed against Black trans people, so that they are not misnamed or dead named, so that there's justice that happens in their afterlife, since we're still working to ensure that there's justice while they're living. Black youth are committing suicide at twice the rate over the last 2 decades that they have been heretofore. It's in part because there is so much that we have to work through. We need to do a better job of talking about our own trauma. Not only talking about it, but dealing with it. Y'all can go to church on Sunday, but you also need to go to a therapist who is licensed and competent. And very much related to that, all politics are local. More of us need to be running for local office. As my sister said, we need to be on school boards. And running for office and being in positions of service is not for everybody, just like teaching is not for everybody. So if that is not your role, then it is your responsibility to keep your neck, or your foot rather, on the necks of those who are elected and hold them accountable, not just when they're asking for campaign contributions or when it's time to be elected, but when it's not sexy and there are no cameras and they otherwise feel like they are not being held accountable.
So I would say, as someone who works for Local Progress, we're a national network of local elected officials. And I see our members, Chanel, I see Candace, I saw Stephanie, and most of our members are Black, and they are women, and they stand strong together collectively. West Bellamy is a member of Local Progress, and so being able to create a space, establish a space where we talk about collaborative governance. And when we speak to collaborative governance, we're speaking about directly having the people who are directly impacted at the center and the core of the work that we do, making sure that we are developing and cultivating a shared agenda. I work directly with local elected officials, so my members are school board members, city council members, county commissioners, soil and water, like Nancy Metier. And so being able to have them to the table and bring community to the table, because part of the problem is that we don't hold each other accountable. Community is on the outside screaming at elected officials, and sometimes elected officials are on the inside not listening to community. And we have to be able to sit together at tables to actually identify what we need from our community, not you living in your head what you ran on a platform for a campaign and not being connected to what's actually directly happening in your communities. And I will say, as a Haitian Dominican American woman who was born and raised in Little Haiti in Miami, I can tell you, immigration is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. 95% of my family still lives on the island in Haiti. And every time, and I'm speaking to the people who still may be in here, who may not be in here because they already gave their stump speech and left. The presidential candidates, if I hear one more time in a debate that y'all speak Spanish and y'all don't acknowledge the black immigrants and what they are going through, you are going to continue to lose our votes. In Florida, Andrew Gillum lost. It was hurtful. It hurt. But I will tell you, who bought up all them Haitian radio stations? Who bought up all of those English-speaking Caribbean radio stations? Were the Republicans. The Democrats did not show up. I will tell you, as the person who was the treasurer of the Florida Democratic Party, who resigned very publicly, that I said, I don't play well with white women who play dumb. And I will say that very clearly, that was quoted. So you can look me up, Francesca Menace. It was quoted in the newspaper. I quit because we had a white, not we had, she's still there, Terry Rizzo. Terry Rizzo, who's probably wandering around here right now. She was the white chairwoman, and we had 3 black state officers, a vice chairwoman, African American, the secretary was a Jamaican American, and me as a Haitian Dominican American, and not one of us were even called during that whole time that election was happening with Andrew Gillum. I was working on the outside with community partners who were fundraising to get people on the ground, to get people out. So the Democrats cost us that election. That's what it was. They cost us that election because the work wasn't done, because what did they do? They centralized themselves in Miami-Dade, Broward, West Palm Beach, and then Orange and Hillsborough County, and decided not to go to the rest of the state like they always do. And I'm telling you this because I need y'all to be making noise, because if they operate the way they did during this midterm election cycle, Florida is going to Trump, hands down, no doubt. And so the way we need to show up in our communities, that we have to take accountability. We can't keep sitting here with a savior complex, expecting for people to show up for us when we're not showing up for ourselves. I don't need no elected official to hold no damn town hall meeting for me. I need to be holding that and asking their asses, demanding that they show up in those meetings. And when they don't show up, that's the accountability right there. When they don't show up in our spaces, why the hell are we re-electing them? And that's at every level of government. And so I need for us to embrace our power. The power that we have had since our ancestors. We were taken away from our land. And we were brought here to be people's slaves. And I need us to embrace who we truly are. From Jum, from Triumph. I'm going to start speaking in Creole. Sorry, when I get... So I just need us to understand that there is work to be done, and we have that power. I know everybody say, oh my God, we are the world. I grew up, I'm an 85s baby. And we have that power, but we gotta be willing to embrace it. We gotta stop being afraid of it. And that also goes to our elected officials. If you are not standing, willing to lose your seat, like Brandon said, then you shouldn't be in that position. And so how are we holding people accountable to those spaces? But again, I'm going to continue to say to these presidential candidates, if you do not show up for the black immigrant community, if you do not speak on TPS, the fact that Bahamas was barely mentioned at that last presidential debate was a disaster. And and I'm like, y'all gonna keep losing us, and y'all gonna keep wondering why most black immigrants in Florida are NPA or they are registered Republican right now.
The doors of the church are open. There are going to be ushers coming down the aisles. They're going to pass the collection plate. We'll take the card that jiggles, but we like the card that fold. Won't you come? Won't you come?
I don't even know how y'all put me behind this sister right here. Everything she said.
Yeah.
Everything she said.
Yeah, you know, this brother is one of the youngest elected officials, so this brother is brave, but I'm not gonna put him up to that, right? Cruel and unusual punishment. Listen, Did you listen? Not here, did you listen? Okay. I want to just really quickly, I don't see how we all don't have that level of passion. How we all can be so cool, right? How we all could be so dolled up and be hanging out here like it's not burning outside. I don't know how we all cannot have that level of passion, right? That level of acute awareness of what is going on, the ability to talk about it, to be about it. If you don't know Francesca, you don't know the work of Francesca, you need to discover it for yourself. But I don't know how we all are not, right? And that's what this is about. It's about us talking, but it's also about righteous, that earned animosity, that righteous indignant anger, right? Right? About what we have been put through. Y'all can't forget what we have been put through. I'm gonna go ahead. This is the question next. How do we successfully build generational or bridge generational gaps, i.e. between the boomers and millennials, while respecting our elders, but holding them accountable with respecting our views and values? And so we want examples. If you don't have to answer this question if you don't have an example.
I mean, I guess I could start on that one. You know? I think for me, and I think what Kenya alluded to it, David alluded to it about relationship building, about knowing your neighbor. When I first got started, I was a precinct delegate, fresh out of high school. And so that meant that I was basically in the neighborhood, building relationships with my neighbors, giving them information from the Democratic Party. I don't know, you just heard the Democratic Party. I was young, you know, and so, you know, I was out as a precinct delegate, and the thing, everyone's like, you know, you're too young. Even when I first ran for city council, when I ran for state rep, you were like, you're too young, you're too this, you're too that. But the thing is that sometimes you just got to sit down and listen to folk, like Phil was just saying. When you really sit down and just give somebody your ear, let them know that you're willing to have a conversation with them, but also at the same time, talking about holding someone accountable. Don't just let somebody roll over you just because you're young, just because, you know, if you're talking to somebody else from a different race, from a different area, don't let them roll over you because you're from where you're at. You know, I'm from Inkster, 6.36 square miles, a small area, but, you know, wherever I go, I let people know that's where I'm from. And I let them know that we need certain resources just like everybody else needs certain resources. And so the biggest thing I think is just being able to build that relationship and have that conversation. Because I think everyone that's older than me, you know, I got aunties, grandparents, uncles, big cousins, big brothers in the community that I'm not related to at all. But for some reason, I'm like their son, I'm their child, I'm their nephew. And so I think it's really just being able to have that conversation with folk and they just look at you in a different way. So next time you approach them, it's more from a humble standpoint. It's not, and we don't even have to hold them accountable to the degree because we already on the same wavelength.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Anyone else want to jump in? Let's get it.
So I'll just say one of my favorite Haitian proverbs, and Sandra knows it too. Me en pile, chai palou. So the hands of many makes the work lighter. And so, again, the way that we show up in our spaces, the way that we show up in our communities is a direct reflection of what we get out of it and what is given to us. And so it's important that when we do this work, we understand that we have to be able to bring people along. And sisters were saying that on the previous panel. We can't do this work alone. And if your ego will not allow you to understand that you have to be able to bring people into this space, you have to be able to, what we say, democratize knowledge, and you have to share that wealth of knowledge with other people, then again, you are actually hurting and harming our communities. You're not doing what's best for our communities, you're doing what's best for yourself. And you need to step aside. And we can't continue to work in that space because we see over and over, everything is being taken away from us. Things have already been taken away from us, but if we thought it was bad, it's just getting worse and worse. And we have to be able to acknowledge that we can't just be in this space privileged. I'm a child of an immigrant. My mom can't read or write. I had to sign my mother's name on school documents. But I stand here with a bachelor's, a master's, been working out here in the community, but I have to go back home. I live in my community. I didn't leave my people. And even if you do leave because you choose, like, I want to live in a separate community, don't forget where you came from.
And send back a
We are rooted in, unfortunately, our trauma. And it's through that trauma that we're able to excel. And we can't let that be our burden. We have to let that be our path to transform our communities. And we have to be grounded in that. And so, my example, I would say a group of my friends a couple of years ago decided to create the Black Collective. And so we are of the African diaspora. Our board is African Americans, Bahamian Americans, Haitian Americans, Jamaican Americans. And we came together with a very clear purpose of understanding that through economics, we gain political power. We shouldn't have to be tied to the conditions in which we were born. We have to understand that in our Black communities, we have to see individual wealth, generational wealth, and community wealth as something that we can attain, not something to aspire to, but something we can grab hold of to transform our communities. And what does that look like is ownership. We have to be able to hold our land. We have to make sure, because most of our communities that are being gentrified right now is because we were renters. And they can easily kick us out whenever they damn well please because we do not own anything. And if you do own something, hold on to it. Because this is part of a cycle. This capitalist system, and I'm just letting y'all know I'm a democratic socialist, democratic Marxist. So I believe in collective liberation. And so the fact that we live in a neoliberal society that looks at individualism and that it is only me and for myself, we as Black people have been left behind because we have bought into this white systematic supremacy that we as individuals can thrive while we look at our other brothers and sisters struggling. And that is not the village that we came from. We came from kings and queens that stood together. We lived together. We fought together. We built together. And we have bought into this white man's ideology, thinking that we can stand on our own while others people struggle. I'll stop there.
So I think there is, I want to be clear, there's a lot of danger in the politics of respectability. Capital P, capital R. It has never been the case that all of us have gotten along. Period, full stop. It is not possible to have transported a minimum of 10 million African descendants to this country without the help of African people. And while it is important for us to know that we can go further when we travel together, not all my skin folk are my kinfolk. I've been in too many places with elders in particular who think that time lived warrants them the ability to tell people what to do and how to do it. There are a number of members of the CBC, since we're here at ALC, who believe that they fought for their seat and they're not gonna give you shit. Fight for what you need to. And so I say all of this to say that, again, we have to sometimes be clear that you cannot be all things to all people, and sometimes you gotta leave people alone. And there are roles for all of us, right? Like, what I'm clear about it is that part of the work, bringing folks along in that way, right? The willfully ignorant, that ain't me. Let's tap in some other people who can do that. But I just, again, want us to be clear that we have to be mindful of what Breon said on the previous panel, which is that if they had done what they needed to do, we wouldn't be here still trying to figure this out. And so there are times where we have to lead, we have to be disruptive, we have to be disrespectful, and do it without apology.
So I'm gonna put a little bit of a different spin on the question, because when Phil asked about how we incorporate all the different generations in the work that we're trying to do, and I think for me it starts at the table. Everything starts at the table for me. I'm a Southerner, so everything happens in the kitchen, and everything's love, right? Even if you don't have all of the ingredients, you take the ingredients that you have and you make the best possible meal out of it. So for me, when we talk about thinking how we do this work and create opportunities and wells of information between all the generations, I think you have to think about how are we passing information, and how are we transferring wealth? Because when you think about wealth in our community, you only think about money. But there's a thing called relationship currency that you get from your elders. So that will require you sometimes humbling yourselves. I know we're the black elite in this room, but there are some people who have suffered and endured by the sweat of their brow who are due homage. So I'm going to give credit where credit is due. I don't disagree with my fellow panelists around how we should have varied approaches, but I will tell you this. I choose not to be disrespectful because I don't believe that I have to be in order to be effective. I think the best way that I am effective is by creating pathways that kind of minimize people's intimidation of what I bring to the thing. Because once upon a time, they were me. And sometimes when people see you, they see who they used to be because they lost a little fire within themselves. So sometimes you have to serve as a reminder that that fire still exists. And sometimes that happens through conversation. Sometimes that happens by striking up the stove and inviting them into your world, or actually asking for an opportunity to be a part of theirs, because conversations happen. Stories are told, and we've lost that element in our community about passing along stories. Because sometimes it's not that they're so different or they're trying to be combative, it's that they feel overlooked. They feel discarded. And we owe those who've come before us an actual seat at our tables, the tables that we're building across this country, the forums that we're having, and the conversations that we're having. David, you said as long as there have been black people, there have been black, gay, bisexual, transgender, all these people, right? That's what you said loosely a few minutes ago. That means that their stories are also there. And we have to create spaces where they feel comfortable letting us into that light. Not saying that what their approach to it will be what we need to adopt, but I think there's some things to be learned from it. I also think when we talk about, Francesca, you mentioned about how we are losing our communities to gentrification because we don't own anything. How many of you in this room make over $50,000? Don't be ashamed. I ain't asking for exact. You know what I mean?
My Cash App is at Mr. David Johns.
Right. My point about how many of you in your communities have a building that's up for sale or for lease or for rent? Oh, yeah. Commercial or residential? How many of you have actually looked at the people who sit next to you and say, hey, we got a new building coming up in our community that's for sale. How about we pool our resources and see if we can buy that building so it stays in our community? That's how we keep our communities. That's how we keep our wealth in our communities. That's how we ensure that schools, when it's time for rezoning, that the people who are sitting in these meetings because they got the notice, because they own the building or they own the land, and we don't get it, and we're actually the people who are residing in the spaces, that those voices are part of those conversations. We got to get creative. Do not let them steal our communities from up under us. Lifestyle, but all conversations can continue. Like sometimes you just got to keep it going. Sometimes the best conversations are had in the dark. Excuse me. So, I mean, I'm just speaking truth to power because I believe there's so much power in this room, and sometimes we get lost in trying to figure out where we're divided. How about where are we equal? Where can we come together? Because there's much work to be done, y'all, and we're spending a lot of time trying to figure out who don't like what we said and how we said it. It doesn't really matter. Did we say it? Yes, we did. Because if you look at some of these people who take issue with young people today, when they were our age, they were raising a whole lot of hell. And they're just mad because they see so much of themselves in us, y'all. And it's just like when you have a kid and that kid look just like you, act just like you. You're just like, why? Why? And it's because greatness has to continue. That's why. Like, God didn't give us all this gift and all this talent for us to waste it on trying to figure out why we're so different. How about where are we alike? How can we really make change move forward for our community? So that's all I got, man.
And I think a lot of that, I think a lot of that comes from conversation. And so when we are approaching the older generation, there's so much that we can learn from them, but we need to be approaching them with humility and compassion as well, because our experiences are different. So there's so much that I can learn from my father, from immigrating from Haiti and growing up in the United States, but there's so much that he learned from me, from being openly gay and navigating a world that is against me, you know? And so we had to come to an agreement when we sat at that table that we were going to respect one another and listen to one another's ideas. And the people that I thought were the most against me, the older generation who would be so anti-gay as a Caribbean, were my biggest allies and advocates when I was able to have a real conversation with them. And so not coming thinking that I know everything and them not coming thinking that they know everything, but really sharing that wealth and that knowledge, I think can be applied to any conversation that we're trying to have.
So you said it doesn't matter how you say it, just say it. So I'm gonna use that as my platform, right? And then I want to ask David and Francesca if I may include another group that hasn't been mentioned.
You don't need my permission?
Well, I say that because you ever been in a position where somebody tries to piggyback off of something you say because they got something they want to say, but it's not applicable? So, so what I want to say is let's not forget about students and people and individuals with disabilities. So I work, my research agenda explores the intersectionality of ethno-racial issues and disability, and I don't use the term disability lightly, and I could expound upon it for days, but we do not have the time. So when I say disability, I'm using it in a very universal way, but seen and unseen, and I'm including the aspect of mental illness. And I just want to say, when we talk about LGBTQIA students, when we talk about LGBTQIA individuals, when we talk about immigrants, we also need to be including the conversation about Black students, Black people with disabilities, because that's a whole another section of the population that often goes unnoticed. And I'm working on trying to get them noticed and helping people to understand the correlations between the two. Not that they are the same, but when you are multiply compounded with issues of marginalization, when you're Black, when you're a woman, when you're gay, when you identify as LGBTQIA because you explain what gay actually is and where it comes from, it gets harder. And so every time you get a label, it gets that much harder. So please, if you haven't given that any thought, give it some thought about what's happening in terms of the disability space and what that looks like for Black people historically and currently.
Do you feel that? Does anybody in here feel what I'm feeling? That what we have just witnessed, right? That people were not just talking theory, right? But people were talking about the hurt and the pain and the struggle and the victory that they have been through. Please put your hands together for this panel. Please, get on your feet and put your hands together for this panel. Because we know that things are bad, right? We know that our people and ourselves are in pain. We know that things have not gotten better and they'll probably get worse before they get better. But how many of y'all remember that old Alka-Seltzer commercial? They said, "Oh, what a relief it is." Oh, what a relief it is that Francesca is in this world. Oh, what a relief it is, right? Oh, what a relief it is that we have a Black Millennial Convention that is bringing the best and the brightest minds of our generation together. Oh, what a relief it is, right? Oh, what a relief it is that we have a Jasmine Rogers in this world. Oh, what a relief it is that we got a Nancy in this world, that we have a David in this world, right? So we know the pain that we feel and that we have in our hearts that we see every day if you stand with your people. But I'm telling y'all that listen, we have a beautiful, what did Marcus Garvey say? We have a beautiful history, but the one we will create in the future will astonish the world, right? Right? He said, "Look for me in the whirlwind of the storm. For with God's grace, I shall return with the millions of Africans in the West Indies." And do you understand? Right? So we can sit in the problem. We can analyze and dissect the problem. But what we have here is the faith and the hope that faith without works is dead. And what we are going to do together when we leave this room is we're going to argue, we're going to squabble, we're going to beef, we're going to have a discourse. But we're going to come together and do something next year that no one ever expected. We're going to shock the world, right? And we're going to do this not just for us, but for all the Black people in the diaspora, right? Because we have a duty. So I want to thank our amazing co-moderators, right? I'm going to thank us. And put your hands together for the crafter of this thing. Put your hands together for Leah.
All right. How y'all feeling? Y'all good? So I am going to, as we close this dynamic afternoon, morning with this is our second annual, I said this at the beginning, our second annual BMC at CBC gathering. And so we entitled this conversation, Equity for 2020 on purpose. It is for us that equity doesn't just begin now and end in 2020. It has to be beyond 2020. It's bigger than any presidential candidate. It's bigger than any one person's agenda, right? For us as Black millennials, especially members of this Black Millennial Convention, especially our steering committee and all the folks we're bringing together across the country, it is about what are we doing for us, by us. And when we do that, we know that everyone benefits. History tells us that. Our present times tell us that, and most importantly, our future. I'm gonna bring up a special guest that's gonna help us to close out. So as you came into the room today, you might have seen a little card at the table that said Equity Declaration, all right? And so what we are looking for as the Black Millennial Convention is equity now. Not 20 years, not 5 years, we want it now. And so I'm going to bring up a guest speaker that's going to help us to close out. I'm from New York, and so my special guest that's coming up here is Jumaane Williams. He is the New York City public advocate. I'm going to bring him on stage to help us close out this conversation around equity for 2020. And so we're gonna just close with this particular declaration. And we're gonna ask as we wrap, if you haven't already, please make sure you are following us on social media. We are also in the works of our third annual Black Millennial Convention that's gonna be held on May 28th to May 31st in Washington, DC. So please follow us. I'm gonna have Jumaane come on up and we're gonna take us through this equity declaration. And we also are gonna encourage you to sign it right up here and then also sign so you can be a part of history, right? So also make sure you fill this out. So I'm gonna bring Jumaane up. Thank you.
Peace and blessings, everyone. How are you? Thank you for the hot fire y'all spitting up here on the panel. I appreciate that. And thank you, Councilmember Webb, for that great introduction. I met her when I was running for lieutenant governor in the state of New York. I lost, it's all right though. We got the third most votes ever in the state of New York. Unfortunately, the first two were the people who beat us. But we got more votes than any non-white candidate ever in the statewide primary with no money. And so I really appreciate that. So I've been listening. This is awesome and so powerful. I got elected to the city council 10 years ago when everybody said that I was too much of an activist. I was too out there, too left, and too crazy. They said I had to get rid of my activism to get elected. I said, no, the best electeds are activists. And so I kept moving forward. They looked at me crazy when I said I'm a Democratic Socialist, when I said I was Bernie. Now, every elected official wants to be an activist all of a sudden. They weren't on the streets. I hadn't seen them anywhere. But thanks to the energy that was created, I've been black for a pretty long time. I'm a first-generation American. I have Tourette's syndrome, ADHD, and I'm now the fourth black elected official ever in the city of New York, and the entire city of New York. As a public advocate, a lot of people don't know what that is. It is one of 3 citywide elected officials, and it's right after the mayor. So I just want to say thanks to all that supported me. But I also want to say, when we're holding folks accountable, I mean, if there ever was a time that there was an advocate that was needed for the public, the orange man is in the White House. And I want to always say that we have to hold everybody accountable, not just our orange man and not just the people who are supporting him, but the people who allowed it to happen. That means Democrats too. Sometimes I lose people when I talk about Democrats who helped pave that way. Some of them are here today. Some of them are in the caucus. We got to keep it real because there were Democrats who also were part of Congress who didn't pass gun laws, who didn't get stuff done. And I want to make sure that while people are saying all the right things now, we remember where they were before because it's critically important. This man didn't come out of nowhere. There's a whole lot of things that happened that came before him. And lastly, I always say, I always try to say we're not trying to change the system because I actually think it's working how it was designed to work. We need to take that system out and replace it with another one. The people who are on top was designed that way. Yes. This was created from the inception of this country. But there are folks like people in this room who are also part of this country who have helped push things forward. And I just want to say thank you so much for that. I realize that what we're asking for, I always thought was so simple. Equity, justice. People scared of that shit. I mean, people are terrified of equity. People are terrified of justice. But we have to understand why it's so difficult, because people don't want it to change. Unfortunately, some of the people who look like us got elected fall into the same incumbency protection plan that everybody else had. We have to continue to elect people whose seat are not more important than the people they represent. That is critically important. So I thank you for the time and the space that you let me say a few words, because my hair is a little grayish, so I don't know I fit in the millennium world. But I want to make sure we're lifting, and of course everybody knows you're not leaders of tomorrow, you're leaders today. There is no movement that didn't have young people hella front. Yeah. So we got to follow y'all. You have the courage, you have the vision. We get up here and we get caught up in how to get reelected. I have always said, I didn't get elected to get reelected. I got elected to do a job. I hope it gets me reelected. I hope I get higher. It might not, and you got to be okay with that. I'm so proud of how I lost the lieutenant governor's race. I would have rather lose it that way than win it any other way. Yeah. And so I know we have the equity declaration here, and we're gonna. I don't know how we're doing it.
You can just take
all right.
one. So.
By the way, equity is not equality. Y'all understand that, right?
Yes.
Okay. We need more just to catch up. I just want to make sure.
So I'll kick it off. The Black Millennial political agenda is addressed mainly to the Black millennial in America. This agenda arose from the lack of access and opportunity for this demographic of people. This agenda exists because of our own cultural and political consciousness. It is our hope that this agenda will bring change to the issues that impact our community. This agenda brings to heel that no real change will happen in America without the change in the Black community. This change will only happen if Black people take action. The time is now. You do the next one.
Tell me when to stop, but I'll keep talking. All right. We convene in our nation's capital a time of great strife in this country. Racial inequities continue to grow. The wealth gap and its trajectory is unsustainable. We can't continue to settle for crumbs when we deserve the entire piece of the pie. This requires leadership and collective community to address issues by advancing racial equity. Our time is now. The Black Millennial Convention's goal is to eradicate structural, systemic, institutional racism and advance racial equity and racial justice for Black people in the United States. Keep going.
The Black Millennial Convention is committed to racial equity. We pledge to advocate for racial equity, racial justice in the United States. We recognize many intersecting oppressions, but our belief is that racism is the glue that connects all oppressions, and thus our focus is on race and the injustices that stem from racialized history and belief systems that are reflected in American culture and institutions. We demand equity now.
BMC recognizes the need to internalize the reality that we live in a racially structured society, and that is what causes racial inequity. Racial inequity looks the same across systems. Socioeconomic difference does not explain the racial inequity. Inequities are caused by systems, regardless of people's culture or behavior. BMC strives to advance the creation of a racially equitable country. Racial equity is the condition that would be achieved if one's racial identity no longer predicated it in a statistical sense on how one fares. When we use the term, we are thinking about racial equity as one part of racial justice, and thus we also include work to address the root causes of inequity, not just their manifestation. This includes elimination of policies, practices, attitudes, and cultural messages that reinforce differential outcomes by race or fail to eliminate them. We demand equity now.
So we need y'all to join in. We're gonna read these last two bullets, and we want you to say, and we'll turn to you and say, we want you to say, we demand equity now. Y'all with the, call and response, how you doing church? Yeah. Okay, we done had sermons today, all right. So, we demand the establishment of statewide and local equity task forces that provide oversight of the implementation of equity-based policies focused on healthcare, education access, economic empowerment, criminal justice reform, environmental justice, affordable housing, LGBTQIA rights, and immigration reform. We demand equity now.
that Congress supports policies that increase the social and economic mobility of black families, and that the Congressional Black Caucus leads the drafting of legislation focused on these efforts. We demand equity now.
The development and support for pipelines that provide ways for young black people to run for elected offices.
We demand equity now. The creation of regional initiatives focused on young black professionals and their advancement in the country. We demand equity now.
That police brutality and its impact on the black community is addressed at all levels of government through the establishment of commissions that are empowered to develop and enforce laws on this crisis.
We demand equity now. That racism is nationally declared as a public health epidemic. We demand equity now.
The time is now, our time is now, and we
demand equity now.
Thank y'all so much for being with us this morning. Thank you to our panel. I want to thank our steering committee members who are here, our incredible moderators. So at the room over here, we actually have an opportunity for folks, if you want to actually put your name on the declaration. If you haven't filled out the card, it's out at the desk when you come in. Thank you so much. Please make sure you follow us on social media. Have a blessed rest of your day and keep moving forward to do the good work. Thank y'all so much.
You got this, y'all. You got this.